Hi,
Hello.
everyone. Hi, Ellen, everyone.
Hi.
Looks like we're ready to go. So let's dive right in. I just want to say hello to the audience. Welcome everybody to Barnes and Noble's Midday Mystery event with Alan Eskens. Alan and I had the pleasure of meeting each other last week at a mystery conference in Chicago. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with him. First, for those who don't know me, I'm Karen Dionne, and I write wilderness thrillers set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Psychological suspense is another term that it's sometimes called. So my two novels, The Marsh King's Daughter and The Wicked Sister, have been published in dozens of languages. Both are international bestsellers and were selected as Michigan Notable Books by the Library of Michigan. And The Marsh King's Daughter, big news here, is soon to be a major motion picture starring Daisy Ridley and Ben Mendelsohn. It's true. Sometimes lightning strikes and it happens. And but Alan is no slouch either. You know, he has numerous novels. He's been published in, I think, was it 26
26
languages?
languages. Yeah.
Yeah, all around the world. And what I'm most impressed with as a writer is the awards that your work has won. I've got a list here. Your work has won the Barry Award, the Minnesota Book Award, the Rosebud Award, the Silver Falchion Award, and has been a finalist for the Edgar Award, Thriller Award, and Anthony Award. So, you know, that's pretty impressive stuff. And as I mentioned, I had a chance to meet Alan last weekend. I also picked up his new book, the one that's coming out on September 20th. This is not the book we're talking about today, but boy, could I. You kept me up till past midnight to finish it. So thanks a
I
lot.
love hearing that. I've grown up to be somebody who likes to either make people cry or keep them awake.
Yeah, that's true. I always say sorry, not sorry if someone says
Yeah.
about my books. Yeah. So Alan, I wanted, before we start talking about the stolen hours, which of course is why we're here, there we go. I wanted to talk just a little bit about you. Now, I know that you were a lawyer for 25 years. It's kind of a big leap to go to fiction writing. How has your legal background informed your writing?
Um, for a long time, I didn't want to write mysteries because I wasn't real familiar with mystery writing. And I went to a class once at the Iowa Summer Writers Festival where they were teaching mystery writing. And the guy got up there and he wrote down a formula. And he said, "This is how you write a mystery."
Hmm.
So I walked out of there thinking, I'm never going to write a mystery because I don't want to write something formulaic. I love writing stories about people and characters. But I'm an attorney. I know how to do an investigation. I know police procedure. I know courtroom procedure. And it just kept pulling me in. And then one day I read Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. And I saw that you can write mysteries that are character driven. And I decided that's what I want to do. And so my background in law is really what pulled me into the mystery genre. But my love of character and bigger themes is how I formulate my style of writing.
I know we talked a little bit when we were together last weekend about some of the challenges of switching from legal writing to fiction writing. Was it easy?
It was not. One of the things I just actually wrote an article for Crime Reads magazine. It's going to come out, I think, this month about that subject. So when you're in law school, they teach you how to write direct sentences. You're trying to persuade. You're trying to engage the neocortex and the sensory, the reason and intellect and analysis. When you're writing as a novelist, you're trying to get past that. You're trying to sneak around the neocortex, get to the limbic system where the emotion is. And so you have to relearn how you write. You have to learn to write in ways where you're putting the reader in the shoes of the character, creating the scene for the reader, and then hopefully the reader being in the shoes of your character will feel the emotion. So when you say, so-and-so felt angry, the neocortex grabs that. Intellectually, the reader understands the emotion, but they don't feel it. So you have to create the scene so that the reader feels it, and the reader is engaged. They're involved actively in working out this story with you.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And, never having done legal writing myself. And you said something about contractions.
Yeah. Well, I also have a degree in journalism. That's my undergraduate. And between journalism and law school, they beat contractions out of me so that I never used them in my writing as an attorney. And so if you look at my first draft of my first manuscript, I'm writing about a 15-year-old growing up in Missouri in the 70s, and he hardly ever uses contractions because it was hard for me to write a contraction at that point. I had to relearn the flow of using contractions. So he was always saying I do not, I cannot, you all instead of y'all. So I had to relearn contractions. It's a small thing, but that's the kind of training you get in law school that just it beats this writing style into you, and you have to overcome that.
Yeah, habits are hard to break. I remember when it used to be you always put two spaces after a period. Remember that? And then the convention switched to one. Which do you do?
I do one.
Yeah,
And that's primarily my daughter. She's, why are you putting two spaces? I said, well, because that's what you're supposed to do. She goes, no, because with the
yeah,
typewriter, that's how we were taught. But now
that's right.
that's not the case anymore.
And looking back, I'm not really sure why it had to be two, but okay. I guess
I
because
think
the
it's the
typewriter,
pica spacing of a typewriter.
right?
You don't have about the one font, where now you have a font and it actually creates a little wider gap there
That's
automatically.
yeah, that's true. Well, okay. One more reason we like computers better than typewriters.
Yes.
Yeah. So I really want to spend most of our time here talking about the book, The Stolen Hours. Alan, it was a Barnes and Noble September mystery pick, and that's so huge. I'm just so excited that they chose your book out of all the books, right?
I am
And
excited as well.
yeah, and I could read all kinds of, blurbs and endorsements. I'll mention mine. Part of mine said, "The Stolen Hours is as good as it gets. A heart-pounding and utterly engaging thriller that had me turning the pages at warp speed." And I know everyone who's listening in today who has also read the book would agree with that. But for those who have not yet read the book, could you just very briefly, without spoilers, tell the audience what The Stolen Hours is about?
Sure. So my story world was created back when I wrote my debut novel, which was The Life We Bury. In that book, the protagonist was a kid named Joe Talbert who was in college, and he meets a girl, his neighbor, named Lila Nash, and they end up dating. So from The Life We Bury, I started telling stories for the secondary characters. Well, Lila Nash was a character I really wanted to tell her story, but I was intimidated by the thought of writing a female protagonist. And so I held off and I held off. And what I did was I spent 2 years reading, almost exclusively great female authors writing great female characters, including your book, um, and all these other wonderful women authors, to try and get a feel for how a good woman author writes a good woman character. And then I would throw in a male author writing a female character to see if I could see a difference, because I didn't want to make the mistakes that so many male authors make. And what I discovered was, the mistakes are sometimes they'll write a female character, but they'll actually, it's a male character just with a female name, basically. It has all the characteristics of a man, but just female body parts. Or they'll have the character be very emotional and act upon emotion as opposed to reason, and go from one emotion in a scene to another rather easily and quickly. Or the worst thing, having this wonderful female protagonist who is at the end of the novel saved by a man. So I wanted to understand how not to write a female and how to write a female protagonist. And when I felt comfortable with it, I wrote the story. Lila Nash is a newly graduated law student. She's starting her dream job as a prosecutor. She's working under student practice rules. And a case comes across her desk that has echoes of a traumatic incident that happened to her when she was in high school. And she digs into this case, and she wants to put this guy behind bars. But this guy is very, very clever. His name is Gavin. So it becomes kind of a cat and mouse game between Lila and Gavin. Lila's not the lead attorney, but she's dedicated to putting this man away. But it also opens the door for Lila to go back and revisit what happened to her in her past, something that she has not dealt with in I think it's 8 years that I've had her as a character. And she finally goes back and looks into what happened to her in high school because she has no memory of it. And it's really a story about a young woman trying to make the inside match the outside. To the world, she seems confident and completely secure, but inside she has this hole of insecurity that she's been struggling with, for all this time, and she needs to deal with it.
Yeah, that I can see, why you were saying that you're drawn to characters, because, Lila is an amazing character. And, it's really, I believe that's why readers read books. We care about what happens, but we care more about who it happens to. So, you really nailed it with Lila. And actually, this is a good time to go into some of the audience questions. People submitted questions ahead of time. So many, I couldn't believe it. Look, here's all the questions.
Apparently we are confusing people and they have a lot of questions for us.
I don't think it's that. So I grouped them into section, the writing process, characters, and general questions. So since we're talking about Lila, let's start with questions about character and her in specific. What was the hardest scene to write in The Stolen Hours, and why? Again, focusing on Lila's character.
Yeah, that's a tough one. See, I outline my novels, so usually the toughest doesn't come when I'm writing it, but it's when I'm outlining it. But I think it had to be the scene where she confronts her mother. I gave her mother this character of, she wants to sweep everything away. She doesn't like bad things, and so she tries to bury them and ignore them. And so when this bad thing happened to Lila, her mother wanted to sweep it under the rug and not deal with it. And that was a strong influence on how Lila dealt with it. And that's part of Lila's, dealing with it, is going back to her mother and confronting her mother. Why did you act that way? Why did you not deal with this? I think that was the hardest scene to write.
Yeah, sometimes it's because maybe it touches a chord with us personally, and or we just, it sounds like you really felt the responsibility for, the emotion and getting things right. And Janie in the chat says The Stolen Hours is fabulous and Lila's voice is authentic and empathetic. So there you go.
That's good. That's what I was shooting for. Thank you, Janie.
Yeah. And so here's another question, which I think I probably know the answer, but who is your favorite character that you created in the book, and why?
In The Stolen Hours?
Maybe we should exclude Lila and say who's your next favorite character after Gavin,
her. The bad guy. So when I write a character, I do a little biography for them. Actually, I do a pretty decent biography for them, because people are formed by how they grow up, who's around them, their society, their environment. And so I want to know, going into a story, who this person is, how they were formed. And Gavin is someone who, he's smart, but he thinks he's smarter than he really is. He envies Hannibal Lecter. He wants to be Hannibal Lecter in his life. And he is formed by a mother who has, she's a gold digger. She lacks empathy. She lacks a moral code. And deep down, I think Gavin is the way he is because he wants to kill his mother, but he doesn't. He picks surrogates. And so just understanding that about him was interesting. And then to try and create a crime as perfectly as possible, where even if you went to the police and said, I did that, prove it, you can't. That was what I was shooting for, is him being, clever in terms of there is no evidence that can convict him.
Yeah. And so this is my own question. I have said when I write my characters, I like my bad guys too, because I understand them, because when I'm writing them, it's a little bit like method acting. I am them and I know how they think and act. Do you feel the same way when you write your bad guy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it was Lee Marvin was asked how he plays such wonderful bad guys. And he says, I don't play bad guys. um, the way he explained it is these people don't believe that they're the bad guy. They are the hero of their own story. And so if you create someone who is just evil for evil's sake, they will be two-dimensional. You have to get inside them and understand how they think they are the good person, the good guy in the story, and how everything they do is justified. And that kind of psychological, walking around in their skin is it's fun, because in real life we can't be evil like that.
That's true. I've heard it said that mystery and thriller writers are some of the nicest people because we get all of our meanness out in our writing. Maybe. Yeah, could be. Does the book have to do with any is there any real life experiences that you drew on to write the book, like yourself or someone you know?
Not so much like in the plotting, but in the understanding the procedures of things. For example, as a defense attorney, I had to understand, how date rape drugs worked. I had, cases where that was involved. I had to understand how investigations worked. So I could know what Gavin needed to do to create his plot. But in this book, actual cases or events, no, this was just my imagination. I come to writing as a daydreamer. I am a huge daydreamer, and I love creating stories in my head. And I'd been doing that my whole life. The fact that I now get to do it and write it on paper and sell it as a book and make a living out of it is just incredible. I think my grade school teachers would be shocked.
That you touched on one of the questions that someone asks, and I'm sorry I didn't attach people's names because I just wanted to keep the discussion flowing, but hopefully you all recognize your questions when I ask them. One of the attendees wanted to know what approach or strategies you use to conceptualize the plot in your book and how much is tied to current events. So you've already said you're like a daydreamer. You just think of things in your head, but are you like inspired by current events, or do you keep a little notebook of ideas?
I keep a book of ideas. I don't attach them to current events. I normally draw, so far all my books I draw from previous characters. So in The Life We Bury, when I first created Lila, I gave her this backstory where she had this traumatic event happen, and I did that because I didn't want her to like Joe, my protagonist, but I didn't want her to dislike him because of him personally. I wanted her to have this wall up that he had to break through. So I created this traumatic event in her life where she had this wall, and Joe had to work to earn her trust. Once I did that in that book, I knew that someday I would have to come back and write a story where Lila dealt with that. But I don't actually draw from current events. So I pull from my previous stories. So when it came time to write The Stolen Hours, I already knew who Lila was. I knew what her backstory was. I knew who her family was. She's been dating Joe. I had this world already created, and then I just needed to fit into that existing world a plot line where she would get the opportunity to go back and deal with that trauma.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So you've already mentioned that you outline. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, how detailed are your outlines? When do you say, okay, I'm ready to start writing the book?
The more experience I get as a writer, the less detailed my outline I think needs to be when I first sit down. But for The Life We Bury, I had two outlines. One was, here's the mystery plot. And you could write that by itself, it'd be a good mystery novel. Then I had the character plot. You could write
Mhm.
that by itself. It'd be a good character novel. Then I wrote the two together. And then before I sat down to write the novel, I had every chapter outline. There's a plot point for every chapter. And then before I write the chapter, I sit down and outline how that chapter is going to go. There's going to be an arc to the chapter. There's, what are the stakes? What are the hurdles that they have to get? What the obstacles that are stopping the character from getting what they want? I'm a very fundamentalist writer. I always go back to the fundamentals. So I'll actually write at the top of the chapter page. This is in this chapter. Here's the character. Here's what the character wants. Here's what is stopping the character from getting what they want. So now we know what is at stake. And now I try and build on that as I'm writing the chapter. For the first novel, I did biographies for all my characters. I don't go into as much depth because, well, now that I've written about them for several years, I know them by heart. But when I'm writing, so the novel I'm writing right now is a standalone that has nothing to do with my previous world. So I'm going back to the fundamentals. I'm creating these characters and I'm writing biographies for them. I want to understand what they want, what they desire, what they fear. And when I look at what they want, I want there to be two levels to it. There's a surface level. I want this. And then there's a subconscious want. So for example, in Nothing More Dangerous, a young boy wants to run away from home. That's his want. He's saving money. As soon as he turns 16, he's going to get his license. He's going to run away from home. But what he really wants is a home that he doesn't feel he needs to run away from. So there's a subconscious want. I like to have that two levels of desire in my characters at the start of my story, so I understand in every scene how they're going to act and react.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you describe this, of course, there are authors who do the opposite and they just start writing and see what happens. Do you think that this is going back to your legal background and prepping for a case and knowing everything about a case before you?
I think having,
or is it just your personality?
No, I think having been to law school, it taught me how important outlining was. If I hadn't gone to law school, I think I would have come to plotting and outlining because that's the way my brain works. My thoughts, my daydreams, they just move really, really fast. And so if I write them down, now I can slow my thought process down. And I was in theater for a long time. That's my initial love of creativity was in theater. And I learned in theater that your first idea usually isn't original. Second and third, probably not either. When you get down to that 7th, 8th, 9th level of ideas, now you're getting into the creativity. And so I sit down with a sketchbook and I write down an idea. Okay, let's, the plot of this story is going to be about a person doing this. Well, what if they did this instead? And I'll write down, and I'll just go deeper and deeper, deeper into the idea process. And usually by about 5 or 6, I'm thinking, okay, that's something that I've never seen before. That's original. I like that. And then, so by writing them down, I'm able to, I think, go deeper into my thought process. And if I were a pantser, someone who just sits down and writes, I would write 20,000 words on a tangent and realize it's not working.
Yeah.
But as a daydreamer, I can go down that tangent in a day or two, realize it's not going to work, go back, start over with the daydreaming, and I haven't wasted 20,000 words.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I don't think I do as much research as you do, but because I'm a little in awe hearing you describe it. But at the same time, I have to know what the story is and I have to know where it's going. And I think your point about how your first ideas are going to be like the obvious ones, that's so important because novels have to surprise the reader. We have to take the reader down paths that they weren't expecting. And
Right.
if we were to always go with that first idea, well, people who read a lot would recognize that and say, I know where this is going. And we don't want them to know where it's going, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Deviating for a minute, Edward Holiday says in the chat, is it better to read your previous books to understand the Stolen Hours? I'm going to answer that because The Stolen Hours was your first novel that I had ever read. And wow, I just slipped right in. I knew that there were previous novels, but it's contained in itself. Now, maybe it's best to read them in order, but you don't have to, because I really love the book without having read your previous work.
Yeah, I write each book as if this is the only book a particular reader is going to read, so they don't have to read the previous books. However, if you had read The Life We Bury and The Shadows We Hide, you would have the background history of Lila, and there'd be another layer of understanding, but that's not a layer that's necessary to come to this novel with.
Yeah. And I think Scott Carroll's question in the chat pertains to what we were talking about in regards to outline, because he would like to know, during the writing, did your characters do things that surprise you? So, you've got this outline, you know where everything is going to happen. Do your characters surprise you?
Not normally.
Mm.
Because I am so fastidious in my outlining, I am very much in control of how the story is going to play out. With that said, the outline is like a map. And as you're going from point A to point B, you may take a detour. And if that happens and the detour is better than the original route, then you stick with the detour. So I keep myself open to making changes, but because because I love the having that outline there when I start my novels, when I start the writing process, I really don't have those detours very much. What happens sometimes though is, as I'm writing dialogue in my head, that people are talking to each other, and I'm trying to write as fast as I can because I'm trying to just keep up with their conversation. And sometimes at the end of that, I look at what I've written and said, okay, that's not where I was planning to go. The conversation took me someplace else. And what I'll do is I'll go back to my outline.
Mm-hmm.
Does this work better or not? And so I rewrite the outline if I need to, but if it doesn't work better, then I rewrite the dialogue to fit the original outline. I'm a control freak.
Yeah, I see that. Well, it's working, obviously. How long does it take you then to write a book? Like The Stolen Hours, was that typical of how much time does it take?
Now it takes me a year to write a novel. I could do it faster if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I'm afraid that if I try to speed things up, I would fall into that trap of using my first or second idea rather than taking the time to let it percolate. But I have a novel, Nothing More Dangerous, that took me 27 years from start to finish. So
Wow.
They don't always go that fast.
I guess not. I guess not. So while we're talking about that, are you planning more books with Lila Nash as the central character?
Not right now. What I do is I'll write about, well, the next book I have coming out that I just submitted is about Bodhi Sandin, who's a law professor, and he works for the Innocence Project. And he gets a case. There's this guy in the security hospital who believes he's a prophet, and Bodhi's going to look at his case to see if whether or not he's there, on false charges. I just turned that in, and that was so much fun to write. And that is actually based on my experience as an attorney. There's a security hospital in St. Peter, Minnesota, which is just over the hill from where I live, and so I did a lot of work there as a young attorney. And the people that you meet there are fascinating, and I always wanted to write a story that incorporated that facility, and so that's coming out. But the next novel, like I said, it's going to be a standalone that has nothing to do with my previous characters. And what I do is I let Lila and Joe grow up a little bit. When it's time for them to have another story, this sounds weird, but they'll reach out to me and say, here's my next adventure. And when that story idea grips me, then I'll sit down and start planning that next novel with Joe and Lila.
Yeah, it's so important to write the story that you're currently passionate about,
Right.
And if you were forced to write another book featuring your characters, and then you weren't feeling it, it would really show in the writing. So
Yeah,
that touches on
true.
what Bill asked. Do you get pressure from your publishers to keep the series going, or can you go ahead and write standalones whenever you feel like it?
I'm sorry, I was reading the comments. What was that
Yeah,
question?
that's okay. I know there's some nice comments there.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking about, do you get pressure from the publisher to your publisher to write a particular book, or are
Oh,
they fine with you just picking
I
and choosing?
have never gotten pressure to write a particular book. When The Life We Bury did so well, they wanted a sequel. But I waited. I wrote 3 other books before I wrote the sequel because I had an idea for the sequel, but it just wasn't reaching out to me. I got those other 3 books done. By that time, the sequel was in my head. I couldn't get rid of it, so it was time to write the sequel. But other than that, I just write the story I want to write. I've been very fortunate that way.
I can really relate to that too. Spoiler alert, I'm starting a sequel to my breakout book, The Marsh King's Daughter, after, having written one in between. And I was working on another, but all of a sudden the story idea came to me. And, here I am writing the book that grabbed me. So I could really relate to that too.
And the characters are fully formed in your head, and they're living in your head saying, okay, it's time to talk to me again.
Yeah. But yes, we're a little strange, but that's okay. We don't let anybody know. We never say that publicly, right?
No, we hear voices, but we're not schizophrenic.
Yeah. So more generally, like your process, we know you outline, do you do something to set the mood? Like, do you listen to music? Do you have any, routines that you have to do when you write?
I sit in a recliner with my laptop on my lap, and actually these headphones on my ears just to take out any sound, and I'm just like inside my head, thinking and typing. It's just, I daydream, type it up, and voila. So yeah, I want to be very, very comfortable. I can't sit at a table. I can't be where there's, I mean, I know I have friends who write in coffee shops. I can't do that. I need quiet, and even though my house is quiet, just having these headphones on, it's like everything is right there inside my head, and it echoes.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like that. So no music.
No music.
Yeah, just
I listen to music when I'm in the planning, when I'm doing the daydreaming stage. I
Mhm.
listen to music. I, if I can go see plays, you know, I watch more television. I look for things that create emotion, evoke emotion in me. And I try and understand what it is that the author, whether it's a song or a play or whatever, what they are doing to create emotion. Then I try and reverse engineer it, and then how can I use that in my own work? So when I'm in the daydreaming outlining stage, I do listen to more things outside. But once I get into the writing stage, I am just so tunnel visioned that it's like, okay, I finished working on this chapter that whole evening. All I'm thinking about is how to structure the next chapter. I go down the next morning, I outline the next chapter. I put my headphones on, I start writing the next chapter. I go for a walk with my wife. I'm in my head writing my novel still. So it's a little irritating, I suspect, for my wife, but that's the process.
Yeah, I met your wife, of course, last weekend too, and she seems pretty tolerant. So I'm sure it works
She's
for
very
her too.
tolerant.
Yeah. So writer's block. Do you ever get writer's block, and how do you get out of it?
Because I outline, I really never get writer's block. At the most, what I'll get is, what's the best way to enter this scene, or what's the best way to transition? And if I'm struggling with that, I find that if I sit at my computer and just stare at it, nothing comes. So I'll get up and go for a walk, or I'll go for a run, or go for a drive, or exercise. And once I start doing that, ideas start coming to me. And usually by the time I finish, I run 4 miles. Once I finish that 4-mile run, I have the answer to that transition. I go back in, I start typing. But I don't really have writer's block in terms of what happens next in the story, because I know what happens next in the story. I've got it all plotted out.
I call it writer's reluctance, because I know what's going to happen, but if for some reason maybe it's outside my area of expertise and it's a difficult scene for me to write, I maybe don't want to write it, but I know what's going to happen. I never really truly run out of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
but
really
here's another thing I do is I'll have a stack of books of, good authors beside me, and I'll just pick up a book and start reading until I find a word that
Mm.
trips my imagination. A word, because we tend to go to words, phrases, clauses that we have used before. It's like this muscle memory. And what we need to do sometimes is change the weather, so to speak, is throw in a word that we would not have used before. So I'll read until, read a page or two until I find a word and think, okay, if I structure a sentence or paragraph around that word, or an analogy or metaphor around that word, will that give me my transition I'm looking for? And oftentimes it works. It's just, I've changed something from where my head is kind of locked up. I put in a new word. Oh yeah, now I can do a whole analogy around that word. Then that'll be my transition. So there's all kinds of little, I wouldn't want to say tricks, but they're uh, little things I do to try and make the process work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, what is it about the world of mystery and suspense and darkness that you love?
Somebody once described my style of writing as a Trojan horse, that the horse is the mystery or the thriller. And they think they're buying a book that's about a mystery or thriller, but really it's about the people inside. And I really like that. However, that horse, that mystery thriller, I love writing stories that are dark and foreboding and powerful and heavy, because I think that puts pressure on the characters in a way that's, I don't write romance, but I got to imagine that kind of same pressure isn't there. In my novel, The Deep Dark Descending, the whole book takes place, and my protagonist is trying to decide. He's on a frozen lake on the Canadian border, and he's digging holes in the ice, and he's got this man tied up, and he's trying to decide: do I push this man through the hole? Yes, and that's the follow-up to that novel. But do I push this
Okay.
man through the hole or do I not? And the whole book is this moral dilemma, this trial where he's trying to decide between vengeance and justice. I don't think I would have that kind of pressure if it weren't for the darkness of what he's dealing with.
Yeah, and it gives a chance for the character's good qualities to shine by contrast, right? If they've had to overcome,
Or
some
or
darkness.
or bad qualities.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it depends on which one they are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So do you also read outside your genre? What do you read for pleasure?
I really don't read for pleasure so much. I read to try and inform my next novel. Unlike almost every other writer I've met, I don't come to this as a big reader. I've always struggled with reading in my life. So I come to this as a daydreamer who wants to write down these stories that are in my head, kind of exercise ghosts as I'm going along. And so I've never really read for pleasure, but I read, like, when I was preparing for the Stolen Hours, I was reading female protagonists by female authors. When I was writing for Sacred Country, I was reading country novels. I was reading William Kent Kruger. I was reading the Longmire novels. I was reading No Country for Old Men. Um, you know, the book I'm outlining now takes place in two different time zones, or two different time periods. So I just read the Paris Library, which goes back and forth. I'm going to reread The Nightingale. I'm going to read books that have that going back and forth in time, that historical versus the present, uh, just to immerse myself in that style of writing. So, but I will tell you, I'm reading right now Blood Meridian, just because I'm a big fan of Cormac McCarthy, and I wanted to, as I'm between projects, that's the book I decided to read and by read, I'm listening to it. Uh, that's the book I'm reading to try and just clean my palate, get ready for the next novel.
Yeah. That's awesome. There's some really nice comments in the chat. Rachel says The Life We Bury was the first book to give her chills. Every book of yours since then has given her the same feeling. And Don, probably Donna, it's getting cut off, says, uh, Alan, she loves your books and has listened to many when she runs outdoors. So yeah, I love a good outdoor book, obviously. I really love the Forsaken Country that I just finished because, you know, it's set in Minnesota, and Minnesota is a lot like Michigan when you start getting out in the woods. And I recognized a lot of the things that you put in there. And I noticed that in your author's notes, acknowledgements, you said that you went on this like backpacking hike in the country in order to get a feel for the story. Do you normally do something that drastic?
I do like researching my projects. So because Forsaken Country involves a chase up to the Boundary Waters, I really didn't feel comfortable writing about that without having experienced it. So I convinced, I'd never camped in the Boundary Waters, even though I'd lived here for 30 some years. So I got a couple friends who agreed to hike up this trail that my characters go on, because I wanted to feel what it's like to walk 7 hours with a 40-pound pack on your back. I wanted to know what the terrain was like. How long did it take to get from point A to point B? And while yes, it was research, it was fun. The Boundary Waters is gorgeous. And so I go back there. I'm going to go back there every year now, just because I love the woods.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And my last question is one that several people sent in, which is, when does the next book come out? Well, we know that The Forsaken Country is coming out in a week. And then also you told us that we'll be seeing Lila Nash again down the line, right?
At some point, yes.
Okay.
The next book after Forsaken Country will be Bodhi Sandin's book, which doesn't have a title yet. I had a working title, but I trust that my publisher will kick that out and come up with something different. Yeah, then the complete standalone that I'm working on that has half of it taking place in Bosnia. So that's going to be some research. I don't think I'll be able to actually go to Bosnia, but I've been watching documentaries on the war in the Balkans in the 1990s, and that's kind of the birthplace for that next novel.
Yeah. Well, wherever you take us, I'm along for the ride, and I know that your fans feel the same way. You just have such a way with words and storytelling and characters. It's just been my honor and privilege to talk to you today. Can you believe our time is up already?
I can't.
Fast, isn't it?
And it's so sweet of you to say that. And I am such a huge fan of yours. I told Karen this when we were at the conference, that I didn't actually meet her at a conference in Dallas 3 years ago, but I sat at a table where she was at, and I was just so awestruck. It's like I poked my wife and said, "That's Karen Dionne," and and I was just I was too nervous to even say hi.
Yeah.
So
I'm really glad we got past that and got to be
yes.
writing friends, and I look forward to seeing you the next time that we're in the same place. For now, virtual will have to do, but thank you, Barnes & Noble, for making this
Thank you, Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming, and thanks again for your enthusiasm for Alan's work. If you haven't bought his book yet, you can buy it on Barnes & Noble. It's available 24/7 online, or your local stores can order it in. And yeah,
and if you're from the Twin Cities, I went to every Barnes & Noble in the Twin Cities and signed all their books, so there's some signed copies there.
Perfect. Yeah. So I guess that pretty much will wrap it up. Alan, anything further you'd like to say before we?
I just want to thank everybody for stopping in, listening to me babble on about my favorite topic, me. And thank you, Karen, for interviewing me.
Yeah, it's been great. So, okay, everyone have a good rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.